haven't been going. I didn't realise today was National Fungi Day. Wow. Specifically because well, it was, but then she, that's why. I don't think they'd prepped her. Yeah. It's 4 o'clock, so I think we'll start. And just before, I don't think the live stream has begun yet, so I'll just do a bit of an intro before that to say the venue is very tight and the acoustics aren't great. We're not mic'd for volume, so hopefully we'll all speak up well enough for you to hear. We have to finish exactly at 5 o'clock today. Because Merlin has to catch a train at 5:15. So apologies in advance that he will have to rush out the door and get into a cab as soon as we finish. Okay, so just so you're not shocked, it's not because he doesn't like you. But we're really pleased that he's with us. Now, in terms of the live stream people, can I ask you, are you going to give me a go and then we start, or what? How does it work? Okay. Okay. So this event is part of the British Mycological Society's UK Fungus Day, and it is being live streamed on their YouTube channel and also on their Facebook page until 5 o'clock. So the whole thing will be live streamed. There'll be 15 minutes at the end for questions from you guys. And when you want to ask a question, please indicate you want to ask a question. We've got a microphone that you'll need to speak into.
Please could you stand up, because we can't barely hear you at the back.
Oh.
There's noise from downstairs.
Oh dear. So there's a microphone that you'll be handed if you want to ask a question of anybody on the panel. And so please use that. The microphone is for the live stream, not for this room. Sadly, we should be mic'd for the room as well, it seems, but we're not. So to introduce, we're here because of Merlin Sheldrake's book, Entangled Life, which some of you may have read. It offers a richness of insight into the often overlooked and or invisible fungi beings and their extended more than human networks with whom we share life. He takes us deep into scientific understandings and ultimately also into the profoundly philosophical implications of what entangled life truly means. We humans and non-humans are entangled whether we acknowledge it or not. The world looks and feels different when we widen into a fungal perspective. My name is Carolyn DeBee. I make site-based audience experiences under the collaborative umbrella of Sirens Crossing. With us today are 6 of the artist collaborators for the Sirens Crossing project, Becoming Fungi, Becoming Forest, Performing the Mycelial City, which has been commissioned by Coventry, UK City of Culture and the Coventry Biennial. And I'm very excited to welcome Merlin Sheldrake to Coventry and to this UK Fungus Day discussion. Merlin Sheldrake, as many of you may be aware, is a biologist. He's the author of Entangled Life, How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures. The book recently won the Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing and has been shortlisted for the Royal Society Science Book Prize, as well as several other kind of accolades, I believe. So we congratulate you on that. Merlin received a PhD in tropical ecology from Cambridge University for his work on underground fungal networks in tropical forests in Panama, where he was a pre-doctoral research fellow of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. He's a keen brewer and fermenter and is fascinated by the relationships that arise between humans and more than human organisms. So, joining us in discussion with Merlin Sheldrake are 3 of the 6 Sirens Crossing collaborating artists. So I have here, this is Katie Coe, Camilla Nelson, and Lisa Franklin. They're each artists in their own right, and they bring to this project and conversation a wealth of knowledges, practices, and concerns. I'd now like to invite each of them to briefly introduce themselves, maybe starting with Camilla.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. It's lovely to be here today. I am a language artist, so I work with words across lots of different disciplines. So I think about language as material, what it is made of, whether that's breath, whether that's ink on a page, whether that is dissolving mushrooms into ink, and how we perform language. So as we speak, using gesture, using sound. And I'm particularly interested in how that relates to other than human beings, how you can forge connections and points of overlap between, say, fungus or plants.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
I wonder if we can place the curtain at the back.
Yeah, maybe the curtain at the back could close.
I guess we're going to have to all
Should we
stand up.
just all stand up?
Don't stand up for the whole thing.
Can we close the curtain as well? Yeah.
Only when we speak, right. So I just feel self-conscious. Okay, so I'm a language artist. I work with words as material, so what they're made out of, and how they're performed. So thinking about it as sound, as gesture, movement, and in particular, thinking of the relationships between human and other than human organisms. So plants and fungus in particular for this project. And I came in contact with Carolyn because I developed a radio series called Becoming Fungus. Well, it's called Becoming Fungus, Becoming Plant, Becoming Insect, Becoming Bird, and Becoming Animal, that I was very lucky to interview Merlin as part of at the beginning. So.
This is Lisa.
Hello, I'm Lisa Franklin, and I hope you can hear us at the back. Sorry about this today. So I am an artist based in Coventry, and I'm an artist that works with living materials. So my current project has been exploring the language of growing, and where words meet nature, meet us, meet words again, and kind of go in full circle. So doing a lot of growing. And that started with vegetable plants and looking at seasonality, and that very quickly, when I kind of ventured into connection, became about fungi, and now I am hooked. So I'm growing a lot of mushrooms in a lot of very strange places, and then seeing how we respond to each other. And again, similarly to Camilla, looking at language within that and how we can explore that across beings. And as part of this project, I will be working as a visual artist. So I do a bit of performance, but here I'm physical and visual.
And this is Katie Coe.
My name's Katie Coe, and I'm a dancer. and facilitator. And yeah, I'm going to speak slowly. I am less language-based, or less this kind of language-based. So if you can't hear me or don't understand something, please ask me to repeat it or say it in a different way. As a performer of around 20 years now, what I begin to or continue to refine my understanding of is that when I dance, when I perform, when I move, when I practice, I become less and less able to separate myself from a kind of interconnectedness that comes in relationship to other human beings, and also many other beings. And I'm really interested, and I feel like there's something crucial in the knowledges and understandings that people that move and practice performance regularly have that might help us or help human beings more generally to feel a less hierarchical way of being in the world. Was that clear? Good. And my relationship to this project is as a performer. Yeah, that's it for now.
Okay. So we haven't heard from Merlin himself yet. And I wanted to begin with just asking you, Merlin, can you hear me? Yes? You want me to stand? Okay. Merlin, your book has been out in the world for some 18 months now, I think. Is that right? Something like that. And you've also been involved in talks and interviews about it. But what do you feel now about where this has taken how has that affected the world? Has it set in motion new networks of understanding, do you think? How have your own ideas or thoughts about entangled life been altered since the writing of the book?
I'll stand. Do make a sign if you can't hear me at the back. Thanks for having me, Caroline. It's great to be here. It's hard to know. It's hard to answer this question because what I realized, and I think many people who write books realize this, is that you write this thing up, maybe like all works of art, and it goes out into the world, and you really have no idea what it's doing. And apart from a few little bits that you hear trickling back. So I really don't know how to answer that question in general, but a friend of mine told me that he was reading Entangled Life to his grandfather before he died, and his grandfather changed his will so that he could be buried rather than cremated to return into a soil place and be in the earth. And that was really moving for me and made me think that, remember how powerful our words and stories are to act in the world. And so maybe there are more people who have decided to be buried rather than cremated. I don't know. But one's enough.
Okay. Camilla, you had a question for Merlin that was thinking about the arts and how his writing or how he's perceived. Do you want to ask that question?
Sure. So at the moment, we're currently devising a series of performances as part of this project. And we are coming up against the challenge of thinking mycelially or beginning to kind of think in a fungal way and think about moving in a fungal way or sounding in a fungal way. And one of the questions I wanted to ask Merlin was, what creative works have you come across that have engaged in the most inspiring or kind of generative or even maybe successful, I know that's a loaded term, with these ideas of kind of being mycelially or fungally, and why did you think they were good?
Well, I've seen various different ones ranging from people knitting mushrooms and crocheting mushrooms, and the knitting and crocheting and knotting of these strands being a way of interacting with the knotting, tousling strands of mycelium, and by which most fungi live. Ranging from that to speculative card games where people have to imagine themselves as different types of fungi that don't exist, but that might exist given what we know about fungi. And I like that one because it drew everyone into their imaginations, which is actually quite a fungal place, an indeterminate place, a place without a fixed shape. Maybe mind maps look like fungal networks because our minds actually behave in this kind of branching, fusing way, fluid way. So I'm not sure which were the most successful, but all of them have involved metaphor. And I don't think there's any escaping that. Even when we look down a microscope, even when we make images or videos of fungi under microscopes, there's a certain metaphor there because fungi under a microscope don't look like that in the real world. We're always staining them, preparing them, lighting them, rendering them somehow. And even growing them a dish to put them under a microscope. No, they don't grow in dishes in the world, and so they look entirely different in the wilds of a confined soil, labyrinthine rotscapes. And we just can't access those places. You can make fake soils with transparent particles, but even then it's a fake soil. So there's always metaphor. And so I find the most successful ones are the ones that engage with the fact that they're using a metaphor and perhaps bring more than one metaphor to the table, a biodiversity, a mycodiversity of metaphors. And so that we remember the stories that we're using rather than just taking them for granted. And so I feel like that's where I found the best, or the most exciting engagement to be.
Great, thank you. Brilliant.
Do you have any ideas of work that has done this?
I feel like we're doing a strange performance in ourselves. It's like we're a little mycelial network and then fruiting bodies. I don't know, because I think I'm a bit not. I don't know what the right word would be. Sort of almost nervous about the application of because we think about mycelial connection. And then it's easy to think of the Wood Wide Web and then the internet. And then does it just become another network metaphor? What makes a mycelial network different from a tube network, different from the way internet kind of connects, and how deeply we are really engaging with what makes it mycelial, what makes it fungal. And so I don't think I've seen any works that have really kind of really grappled with that in a kind of sort of, I want to say a kind of dirty way, which just sounds weird, but in a sort of like really getting into the difficulty of it, almost in the messiness of it. But I suppose that's what our job is.
Yeah. So we've only just started our project. So we're really at the beginning of this. And I personally have been doing a lot of reading, but just recently started trying to grow fungi myself. This is layers of cardboard in a plastic container that were soaked in water, and then I put what is it called? Spawn. The mushroom spawn in between the layers of cardboard. And you won't all be able to look at it. You can come and look at it afterwards if you want. But the mycelium is so tiny. It's just really microscopic hyphal tubes that have grown and impregnated all the cardboard. And then the mushrooms start to come up. They're also made out of mycelium, as I've learned from Merlin. But this is such a largely invisible part of the world that we don't kind of really experience, and yet it has such profound implications, again, as we've learned from Merlin's book. So I wanted to ask you, Lisa. So Lisa is this artist who works with fungi as one of the living materials that she works with, and I wondered, how has working with fungi in your own art practice altered you and your understanding of being in the world?
Ooh, that's
a big one.
That's a big question. Oh, yes. I would say that working with fungi has quite dramatically changed me as an artist, but also as a human being. How has it done that? Oh, so many ways. So I feel almost like I'm a different human since stumbling into this kingdom that exists within us, around us, everywhere. I have had a few lessons from fungi. So I've had a real lesson in patience, and I've had a real lesson in trust. So I suppose one of the things about working with living material is you go at its pace. It doesn't go at your pace, or to a certain extent. And that's where it gets interesting, because it starts to become that you're working together. And actually, I feel like co-creating with this like magical being that exists. And that's really exciting. So it's made me realize how little I know and how little I think we know. You probably know a little more than me, but I still feel like we don't know anything, really. There's so much more to explore and learn. And it's allowed me to be much more playful in my work, because I suppose it's inspired that within me. It's just something that feels quite alien, but is one of the most natural things. And it's hard not to be playful within that, I think. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought of another answer to your previous question, but maybe that can come in later.
Go for it.
I suddenly realised, because I was thinking purely mycelially when Carolyn asked. But of course, I curated a whole radio show on becoming fungus and interviewed quite a lot of artists who are making work. So I've just completely ignored all of their work. And what most of them weren't trying to behave mycelially. They were more working with fungus, a little bit like you, Lisa, almost as not quite educators, because that sounds, they weren't educators, as fungus as educators. So Stephen Emerson is a poet who did some fungal translations of Rilke, which similarly to you, Merlin, growing, and like lots of people, and you as well, growing oyster mushrooms out of books. He was interested in what that would mean, in how fungus translates a book. What does that mean? So when it's growing out of these words, and then he would eat the fungus. And so that idea of eating words, as I think you did, but he went one step further, because then he collected his urine afterwards as a translation of the text. So it was just sort of beginning to thinking about in a more maybe systems way, and this is something we were speaking about before, kind of thinking in terms of flows rather than in terms of like static states or as in things. So yeah, I think it's really interesting when works engage with fungus as almost as a question, keeping the question live, perhaps.
Yes.
Can I jump back in quickly?
Okay.
Yeah, you just made me think there. So it got me thinking about when I've grown fungi or mycelium in books and then explored similar things, so the language of that. And when mushrooms come, often as they detach from the book, they have taken words with them. And I've found that fascinating, which words they've chosen to bring along. And then can we write poetry together, maybe, from those words that it's chosen, a kind of a found poetry. But just drawing on what you were saying about metaphor, how much is this co-creation and how much is this us projecting, or giving meaning to these things that we're experiencing or we're witnessing? I'm just kind of interested in that as an idea as well.
Yeah.
And it's a good question. In the biological sciences, there have been lots of examples of this. The study of symbiosis, the relationships between organisms, has been a place where all sorts of different human worldviews have played out. Are these relationships a battle? Are they a fight, a contest, competition, or is it more cooperative? It is a utopian place, a place of caring, a place of sharing, and so you can see these different human theories of life playing out in the way that we make sense of these organisms. Of course, the organisms are just getting on with their lives as they always have, and we're torturing ourselves trying to work out what's going on. And then, so it's been so with lichens, for example, or the relationships between plants and mycorrhizal fungi, and you still see this today in the way that these networks, the shared mycorrhizal networks, are figured, and with these different metaphors. So I think it tells us a lot about us, for sure. And sometimes we can definitely smother these organisms in our innuendo. And so the challenge is to observe enough, to listen enough, you know. And then when you were talking about these different mycelial ways of being, you know, is this actually what mycelium does? There are so many ways to be a fungus, so many ways to be a mycelial network. Some are tiny ephemeral puffs that live on specks of house dust. Some sprawl over kilometers. Some weave nets which hang under trees and catch falling leaves, which they then decompose and behave like filter feeding animals. So all these different ways to be a mycelial network. Even one type of fungus, one type of mycelial fungus can grow into totally different networks depending on where it is. It's always in dialogue with its surroundings. So I think it comes down to how closely you're observing, which is a kind of listening.
Yeah, actually, I think that's really nice. It brings this to the fact that we are thinking here in our project in Coventry, not only about fungi, but the relationships that are part of the fungal reality. So, and this symbiotic cooperations or different kinds of relationships between different organic beings. And in my work with Sirens Crossing, I often think we make site-specific audience experiences out in the world. So they're out in the city, often indoors, outdoors. And I'm always interested in discovering or suggesting new ways of noticing relationships. So noticing yourself, noticing you're in relation with the other kind of living entities in the world and the other systems of the city, the flows of the human and the non-human. We hope to displace or move beyond this entrenched human assumption about how the world works, because we've kind of structured all these economic systems and all these kind of technologies and social systems. And so that's the world. But actually, many of us, and I think this probably is true for many people in this room, are quite tuned into these other things. Amongst us, we have some of the tree wardens from Coventry, and they're very engaged with trying to recognize the value and the role of ancient trees in the city and beyond. So this work is trying to highlight those relations. Which brings me also to the global climate crisis. I feel like this is really relevant to what we as humanity, human beings, need to find these other points of view or these other ways of understanding. The title of our piece is about becoming fungi, becoming forest, performing the mycelial city. What does it mean to become? You know, what is that? And in my mind, that is different to being. So it's a process rather than a state that you arrive in, and that life is always in this process of transiting, decomposing, mutating, translating. So all of those words, some of those words have already been mentioned today. I don't know, Katie, if you wanted to say anything about, because we had a conversation today, and Katie asked me, she said, I'm thinking about how my practice as a dancer might meet the needs of our times. And I think you were referring to that kind of urgency in terms of the climate. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I want to give that question context. I just arrived back from spending a week co-host or holding a workshop with Tom Goodwin, which forms part of a program called Kinship that we've been doing for quite a long time. Both Tom and I are dancers, and that's our kind of mainstay. And yeah, in recent years have been taking some of these knowledges, if you like, or some of these ways of listening and hearing that I described earlier out with others to, I think reconnect is the wrong word, but to listen again to how we're interconnected. And the question actually that I proposed to Carolyn this morning came from, it's a kind of rough translation, or maybe it's quite a close translation of a question that Tom asked the group this week. How does my practice meet the needs of these times? And there were a couple of other things that came up in listening to what everybody is saying. One is that actually in learning through some workshops that I've been doing in relation to social justice, I know that one of the things I need to keep understanding and knowing more deeply is more about this, rather than often reaching towards and going out towards trying to learn how it might be to be something or someone else. And I was just thinking about that in relation to mycelium and fungus, and that like absolutely I have nowhere to go because it is in me as well as everywhere. So I was thinking about this kind of place of like keep trying to listen and hear from this place in order to listen and hear things that we might often miss or have not bothered to hear, or including other people. I'm going to put some things out there and know that in my shakiness might not complete or make sense. There was something also about going, we have this. If we are this, we also have this. Like suddenly feeling hopeful in listening and thinking about quite a lot of what I read in Merlin's book and in other books that I've come across, for example, Conscious Medicine, and books that bring us also into the medicine that's here and here. And the other thing I wanted to mention in relation to continuing to learn to give attention and time through dancing is that that this is I've had the privilege of working alongside lots of midwives actually in some of the projects that I've done that relate to the voice of dancing and the voice of dancing as a practice. And one of the ways that midwives work is it's like the root of what they do is to support and nurture something that's already happening, not to make something happen, but to support and nurture something that's already going on. Like the birthing process has begun, and the midwife supports them. And in dancing or performing dancing or being a collaborator as a dancer, I really identify with that. It's like it's not mine, but it's something that's begun or that is happening, and I might be able to offer I can offer my skills and attention and time in order to kind of make it bigger or make it more visible or make it happen. And somehow that also seems to relate to our intra-relationships or interrelationships with fungus and mycelial networks, and therefore all other sentient beings.
Thank you. You remind, Katie, that reminds me of so many things. But when I first worked with Katie was in 2017 here in Coventry. And we were doing another project that was in the city. And when I first met Katie to talk about the new project, we went on a walk around the entire ring road, under it, beside it. Yeah, so we did the whole circuit, talking. And as we were talking, she kept noticing edible things. Do you remember that? Because she's a forager, amongst other things. And so we ended up, after this long walk, with a bundle of edible herbs that she had discovered along the ring road. And I just found that incredible. But it also made my point. The city is not a separate place. The city is also part of these kind of systems that we're talking about. And that's something that we're super interested in here. Yeah, so that was good. And then another anecdote about the previous project in 2017 was that we would always walk past a particular bit of municipal lawn that's close to the train station. And one day we went past and there was a huge flush of shaggy inkcap mushrooms growing out of this really manicured municipal lawn. And Katie was identified them as edible shaggy inkcaps, so picked a whole bunch of them, cooked them that night, and Katie and Jayu, one of our collaborators, had that for dinner. And what we've noticed in the years since, there's always shaggy inkcaps coming up in repeatedly, flushes of them in that spot. And I think that means that there's wood under there.
That's a tree down from.
Yes, so that tells us something about the history of that location, possibly. But you also thought it could be that they brought in wood chap. I don't know if that's, but they keep coming back for years. So Merlin,
tell us why.
Well, it's hard to know about that exact spot.
yes,
But of course, mushrooms are just the reproductive organs of mycelial networks, and mycelial networks don't just live for one season, but can live on and on and on. And those fairy rings are a very textbook example of how these patches don't just recur in the mushroom flashes, but we can see the patch with our own eyes in the form of a dark patch or a burnt patch of grass.
But they're white rot, aren't they?
Shaggy inkcaps,
They eat dead wood.
Well, I'm not sure whether they might live off roots as well, like decomposing roots.
But there's no, okay, because that's what I thought. I got really excited. And I thought,
decomposing
were
grass
there
roots.
trees there?
But,
does that tell us there were trees there? Yeah.
I'm not actually sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Got it.
Yep, go ahead.
I really loved hearing what you were saying, Katie. And I think it was a really good reminder. I think sometimes for me, with language, I'm always interested in trying to get into the material and the body. But there is also something about being verbal that can take you into your head very quickly. And as a mode of understanding to sort of feel like you're in your brain. And a lot of the sort of brainy or more cerebral ways of thinking about things, I feel like you end up in I'm a human, this is a mushroom, that's a tree, and we're all these, discrete entities that are separated out when you're sort of thinking with your more like head way of thinking. And what I have found since doing more performative body-based work, which I think I was getting from the way you were speaking, was that the minute you get into your body and start really feeling what it feels to be a human being and to begin to sense sort of, your heartbeat or, how the blood is rushing around through your skin or the nervous signals or whatever is happening, there is a sort of begins to feel, as you're saying, a kinship between how other processes might be working in other organisms. And there seems to be a kind of humility in that we're just another organism amongst other, all of these organisms that we are not just alongside, but have grown out of and alongside, that our history goes back into plants and plants go back to fungus, and that we are an embodied remembering of that. So I really enjoyed what you were saying, if we can kind of dig into ourselves as well, rather than thinking, I need to get into that mushroom, which is of course impossible. I don't know if you had anything to say in response to that, Merlin or Katie. Or
I think it's really helpful to think about the fluid edges of ourselves. There's a scholar called Jack Forbes, and he wrote a beautiful piece where he says something along the lines of, if you cut off my ear, I'll survive. If you cut out my eyes, I'll survive. A leg, an arm, I'll survive. But take away the air that I need to breathe, and I'll die immediately. Take away the water I need to drink, and I'll die immediately. The implication being that these flows that we maintain with the environment around us are more important than many of the things that we think of as ourselves. And of course, this is made very clear by our microbiomes, the communities of microbes that live in and on us. We are many, and this is not a metaphor. So the fluid edges of ourselves in terms of the processes that we are constantly engaged with. So then where are the limits of ourselves? This becomes a really exciting question, without really a definite answer. It depends on your point of view. Where do you want to draw the line from this in this moment? It may be convenient to think about myself as this body, because I've got a seat and I've got to fit in my seat, same with an airplane or on a train. But when I'm walking around outside, maybe I can relax my concept of myself to fit into a bigger space, a space which is overlapping with other organisms' fluid selves. And so it gets into a whole different kind of a realm, kind of a riddle space, one which you're not often encouraged to think about by the philosophies and worldviews and economic structures that we live within, and also the features of our language that divide to subjects and objects, to which things are done by verbs.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Just wait. That might bring me to another question that I had for Merlin, which is, he talks in the book about humans as centrally brained beings, as opposed to the fungi having a dispersed brain, or they don't have it. There's no brain, but there's kind of a dispersed communication intelligence. I'm not sure what the word is. And my question is, don't humans also have this capacity? This is referring a bit to this idea of embodiment, of being able. I had a dance teacher who used to talk about the cat brain that we have, meaning we can dance and improvise, or a jazz musician. They're not thinking first about what notes they're going to play, but they're responding in real time to the kind of the riffs and the energetic and the vibrations that are being produced between the members of the band. So we have possibilities of using a gut reaction. We use that word gut reaction as human beings or human becomings to the world. So could we perhaps be more like fungi than we think? I don't know.
I think this is a fun question to explore, and it's definitely, it seems to me that and it seems actually to many people in neuroscience, there's a whole turn now towards inactive cognition, the cognition that happens when we act in the world. Our senses participate in the world that we perceive, and that we think as much by doing as by being passive recipients of sense data that comes in, and then we process like a computer and then act. And this all takes our whole body. We are our bodies. We're not just a brain. So I agree that there are all sorts of ways that we aren't just these things floating in our heads, and brains have had, I think, far too much. We're proud of our brains, and I understand why, but maybe a little too proud sometimes. And But nonetheless, there are some just biological realities. Like we do have these centers. We have a center of circulation called our heart. We have a center of our nervous system called our brain. If I stuck something through my brain, I would die. And if I stuck something through my heart, I would die. And a fungus was not like that. You can take a fragment of a fungal network and it would regenerate an entirely new organism. And you can keep doing that potentially forever. So there is a greater fluidity and a greater indeterminism about fungal life and fungal bodies than we have with our bodies. Even though we do have some regenerative capacities, I was told recently that children under the age of 7 can regrow their fingertips if they lose one, but then they stop being able to do that. Lots of other animals have astonishing regenerative capacities. You can cut off the tail of a salamander and put it where its leg was, and the tail in the leg place will turn into a leg. And flatworms you can cut into endless pieces and they'll turn into new worms. So it's not just that there are lots of animals that behave in more the octopuses and other cephalopods have brains distributed through their bodies, and their tentacles can explore when they've been cut off from their bodies and even taste as well. So I think there's all sorts of shades and scales and continuum. Yeah.
All right. We're now just at 1:45, so we have 15 minutes that we could take questions from you if you have any. Does someone have the microphone that they'll be carrying over to? Okay. Does anyone want to pose a question to Merlin or to anyone here? Or yeah, okay. And you'll have to speak up.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, so just a follow-up question to what you were just saying before about the differences between human bodies and mycelial networks. It's kind of a common kind of idea that maybe mycelial networks might offer an alternative intelligence. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about the similarities between neural networks and mycelial networks.
Maybe repeat the question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the similarities between neural networks and mycelial networks. Well, I mean, there are similarities in the sense that they're networks of tip-growing cells, and neurons grow from their tips, so they're fungal hyphae. And also there are compounds that pass around in fungal networks that you also find in human nervous systems, like glutamate and glycine, for example. But I think the architecture is really quite different in other ways. And the neural networks are based around neurons which have these gaps, these synapses. And at these synapses, there's a junction, there's a chemical junction. And fungal networks tend to be continuous. And they tend to be continuous because they're moving stuff around them. They're kind of circulatory systems. You know, this network, which is sprawled across this area, might be getting food over here, and it might need the food over there. And it's got to move this stuff from here to there. And so our nervous systems are more about, there's less stuff moving through them, although there's stuff that moves along individual neurons, but it's not traveling so much around our bodies that way. That's why we have separate circulatory systems. But still, this fantastically complicated networks of tip-growing cells, and in the case of some mycelial fungi, electrically excitable cells. So I think that, and the way that the both types of network can remodel themselves in response to what's going on around, and somehow encode memory in that. And these pathways can be strengthened or weakened according to what's being used and what's not being used. So I think there are lots of ways to think about the parallels, for sure.
Thank you.
I have a question about mycoremediation. This is really selfish, I'm so sorry, but I was going to ask if you could sign my book, and I didn't realize you had a train to catch afterwards. And do you have 30 seconds to give me an autograph? It's okay if not. But also, on a scientific note, how do you feel about like the idea of mycoremediation, the knowledge that fungi can break down plastics and that we could theoretically use them and other microbes to turn landfills back into soils? Like, that's something that really excites me. So,
well, it's a field with a lot of promise. Fungi have amazing appetites and chemical abilities, but it's not so straightforward. You know, we have these contaminated environments. You can't just take a strain and just drop it there and expect it to thrive amid the hustle and bustle of who else happens to be living there already. So it seems to me that, but then again, humans have recruited fungi to break things down forever. We have miso, alcohol. This is a kind of mycoremediation. We're just asking the fungi to remediate sugar into alcohol. And we give them special conditions to do so and all sorts of encouragement. So I think more along that line, moving forward to mycoremediation, it might be more helpful to think about how we can divert waste streams into facilities where certain fungi are given the opportunity to thrive in the conditions they need, rather than think about just throwing fungi into the environment. Of course, there are situations where you can encourage fungal regeneration, like say by adding wood chips or swales, sort of bags packed with straw inoculated with oyster mushrooms, and these booms that people have been floating around to help with oil spills. And there's all sorts of active research going on there, and it's very exciting. So yeah, you can think about it in lots of different ways, and lots of promise.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was just wondering, there's a chapter in your book to do with Terence McKenna and the existence of psilocybin mushrooms. What's your take on the idea that psilocybin can help humans to access the mycelial intelligence in that way?
Well, I've often found, I feel like our minds are probably the most mycelial parts of ourselves. Our minds aren't confined and constrained. They sprout and unfold, and our imaginations feel to us very fluid. At least my imagination feels to me very fluid. And I know other people I know have told me that theirs does too. And so I think the way that we connect with different parts of our mind in different manners and ways of experiencing can teach us all sorts of different things about decentralization, about indeterminacy, about these things that we think about when we think about mycelium. And also, interestingly, with psilocybin and other psychedelics, it seems to loosen people's understanding of where they start and stop, sometimes called ego dissolution, a sense of blending with one's environment. This is a phenomenon we find in all sorts of areas of fungal biology. And in this case, with psilocybin, it's happening in the most intimate setting, that of our own minds, a sense of losing track of where we are and dissolving into our surroundings. So I think there are various ways that it can take us into different places in our mind, and then it would be up to us to decide whether that was any more fungal or not. And I'm not sure that'd be a matter of opinion. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry to ask another purely science-based question, but it was just someone referenced climate breakdown. And it was just basically to ask a question of how much do we know about the various mycorrhizal networks, say, in woodland environments, and how are they likely to react to rising temperatures? And, as we potentially lose certain species of mycorrhiza, how is that going to affect the general ecology of various places?
So there's a lot that we just don't know about this stuff. I'm part of an organization called the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks. And we just received a big grant to map the mycorrhizal networks of the planet, to take samples from all these different areas and to start to build a global database and a map that allows just to see with different layers of climate and vegetation and land use change, how these mycorrhizal communities might shift in response to changing climates. How might we expect these distributions to change, and what that might mean for the other organisms that live in the space, because these mycorrhizal relationships really are the root, literally at the root of these terrestrial ecosystems. So it's a really important subject, and there are lots of, thankfully, more and more people studying these communities.
The second part of the question was, we often talk about tipping points in relation to climate. And is there also maybe a potential for a mycological tipping points?
Well, I think like when you have any kind of organism and you have patterns of extinction, and beyond a certain point, it becomes very hard for organisms to recover. And there are so many fungi that we just have no idea about. There are so many fungi that live their lives only in association with these organisms. And if those organisms go extinct, then the fungi will also go extinct. So, yeah, there's just these unknown unknowns, lots of them.
I want to ask you if that study will be considering urban settings as well as
Yes.
non-urban. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Yeah. Well, we've seen the evidence in Piles Coppice. Yeah, there's a local woodland here called Piles Coppice. Is anyone you're familiar with it? Yeah. So it's one that the tree wardens in Coventry are trying to stop from being cut, substantially cut. And a recent visit there, we saw evidence of the mycorrhizal networks, which were earth ball mushrooms growing amongst the trees. So it's an ecosystem, a good example of an ecosystem that is a networked place and needs this sort of whole community to continue to thrive in the way that it has been thriving.
It hasn't been touched for 100 years, so we're desperate to keep it untouched.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yep. So do speak into the microphone.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I work in a bookshop, so I've had lots of conversations with people about your book. People always say to me, "Oh, what's it about?" So I'll say it's about mushrooms, and then kind of conversations will go from scientific to kind of borderline spiritual. So I just wondered, what would be your answer to what is your book about?
I tried to do it in the subtitle: "How fungi make our worlds, change our minds, and shape our futures." And I wrestled with it for a while, but I don't think I can do it more concise than that.
Brilliant, thank you.
Actually, can I ask you then about that title? So I think the book is very clear about how fungi make our worlds, change our minds. But what is the future? How does it shape the future? What do you see in that regard?
I don't know. I mean, what's the future? I have no idea. That's the thing about the future. But whatever the future is, fungi will be there doing something, as they have been for the last billion years. Yeah. And we know some things about the kinds of things that fungi do and the way they make our worlds. It's, yeah, I mean, it could go all sorts of ways, right? So we think about fungi, we think about the relationship, the importance of these fungal relationships in helping us deal with climate change, for example. But then there are all sorts of other ways that fungi might make climate change problems worse. So if areas start to warm and new pathogens of trees get into certain types of forest, kill all the trees in the forest. So a fungal pathogen kills all sorts of trees in the forest, and then other types of fungi rotting all these trees, returning all this carbon to the atmosphere. We have a climate change-induced fungal problem, as well as all the fungal potential solutions. So solutions is a tricky word. So yeah, fungi will be there. Fungi will be doing stuff, and what they'll be doing, I haven't got a clue.
Another book.
So then this anticipation of the future is not dependent on how we as humans develop our relations with or ignore fungi. Is that significant, do you think?
Yeah, hugely significant. I think that fungi make really good allies for us now. They always have, of course. But learning about the fungal lives, learning about what they do, where they do it, who these different fungal species are, and with whom they relate, and in what way do they relate, I think this can really help us to move forwards in new ways and help us reimagine our relationship to a living world in new ways. And change many of our destructive practices. You know, the industrial agriculture in the 20th century, it evolved taking no account of the life of the soil. And in doing so, it caused incredible damage to the life in the soil. And so there's a kind of ignorance leading to terrible ecocide. And so the less ignorant we are about fungal lives, the more of an opportunity we have to revise some of our practices.
Okay. Is there anyone else with a burning question? No. Okay. We've got 3 minutes, and that's probably enough time for you to dash to the door. I know you're hovering to get a signature or yeah. Is there anyone else who was urgently hoping to get a signed book? I'm going to thank you very much. We're going to hang around for a bit longer here, relax and have a drink. So even though Merlin can't stay, if anyone wants to chat, you're welcome to do that. Thank you so much for coming, and spread the word. Spread the knowledge and this. Yeah, exactly. Spread the spores. Sporulate. All right. Thank you so much.